last meeting is when you guys talk, you have to speak right into the microphone. If you're up here, it won't record onto the video. So be prepared to speak into the microphone. And then I thought what we could do is start again for our TV audience and others. We could start again with introductions. If you could say how long you've lived here, or have had a business here, and your interest in this topic. That would be great.
Craig Danielson, Hilltop Mall, 60 plus years, and concerned about their water rates and good quality water.
Thank you.
And Rose Holden, Oregon City Golf Club, 50-some years. And we're on both sides. We're outside of the city barely, and interested in Oregon City's rates as well as Clackamas River Water's rates.
Thank you, Rose.
Tim Powell. I've been in Oregon City probably 16 years and been involved in the water district for most of that time in some fashion, and interested in getting the best value for our citizens. But also understanding that there is a cost to providing.
Thank you.
Damon, maybe 40 plus years. So always interested in water and rates, and as a unemployed taxpayer, I want to make sure that things are done as economically and safely as possible.
All right, thank you. Kim, one thing you missed the instructions to speak into the microphone when you're talking last time. If you're not speaking into it, the TV equipment can't pick you up. So if you want to say what your name, a little bit about what you do, and why you're interested in drinking water.
All right. My name is Kim Swan. I work for the Clackamas River Water Providers, which is a coalition of all the cities and water districts that get their drinking water out of the Clackamas River. South Fork Water Board, Oregon City and Westland being one of my members. Drinking water is part of what we do, so I have lots of interest in that.
Thank you. And then I'd like for city staff to introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name's Alit Froman Goodrich. I'm with the Public Works Engineering Department, and I'm also project managing the water rate study.
I'm Adam Crafts. I'm with the Public Works Department, and I'm assisting as I can.
I'm John Lewis. I'm the interim Public Works Director, overseer of this project and several others. So I'm interested in water rates, sewer rates, pavement maintenance fees, stormwater rates, the gamut. So thanks.
Thanks.
I'm Eli DeBerry, Water Operations Supervisor for Oregon City. Been here about 15 years now.
Gail Johnson, I'm the Water Quality Coordinator for the City of Oregon City. I've been here a little over 14 years.
Hi, I'm Wyatt Parno. I'm the Finance Director here at Oregon City. Been here 2 months.
Thank you. And then we have a guest who will speak later in our public comment period. I'd like just introduce yourself.
I'm Frank O'Donnell, a 20-plus year resident of Oregon City, active at the time of the initial measures back in the 90s, here to possibly give a little history, hopefully avoid the mistakes of the past, and get some clarity on some of the issues that I saw presented in the last meeting.
All right, thank you. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Dan Holliday. I was the chief petitioner on the water rate rollback measure in the early 90s, whenever that was.
And could you just let us know a little bit how long you've lived in Oregon City or had a business here?
I've lived in Oregon City all my life, graduated from Oregon City High School, served on the Oregon City School Board, served on the Oregon City Commission, been politically active and continue to be. Great. Thank you for coming today. John, you have a microphone. Sorry.
John Ghilarducci, principal with FCS Group, consultant for the city.
All right, so we have a little bit of a packed agenda here today. Both Johns are going to give you guys some information about the water system revenue requirements. Craig suggested some more detail on, what the needs are on the revenue side. John's going to go through some of the rate revenue needs scenarios, and we're going to talk a little bit about the water rate rollback. And then what we're really here for today is a discussion with all of you to get your feedback and advice on the information that both Johns here are going to present. So one thing I'd like to do is because I want to make sure that everybody gets out of here on time, and Craig, you said you have to leave at 10:15, or quarter to 10. So what I'd like to do is let these guys get through their section of presentations, and then we'll have questions, and then you can give your presentation and we'll have questions, but it will help if they can get through their sets of slides. If that sounds okay with everybody. And with that, John, I'll turn it over to you.
Actually, I think the first one's John Ghilarducci, what I saw on the slide. Or not. That's what Alita's presentation said.
Oh, well, John.
I can talk through it. That's okay. So it's going to set me back just a little bit. I'm going to have to remember.
Well, John, do you want to talk through
You want to go through this one, John? I did have your name on the slide, so I thought maybe I would.
Sure, but I'll be making it up as I go along, too.
Yeah.
The history of the water rate rollback, from what I understand, the impact of that, and this was a charter amendment back in 1996, and it requires the city to roll back water rates to 1994 levels. The problem was there was debt service and debt that had been issued. So, long story short, the bondholders sued to allow the rates to support the debt, and the court determined in 1996 that the city wouldn't have to roll back the rates until the debt was paid off, which happens in November. It happens actually middle of October of 2014. So the rollback provisions will take effect then, absent any other action in October of 2014. We're assuming that would take effect November 1st, 2014. The provisions of the rollback also, they require a public vote for any rate increases higher than 3%. The city's had a number of 3% increases since 1994. Anything above that would require a public vote under the charter amendment. The city cannot issue debt in support of any capital improvements that it might need without a public vote as a result of the charter amendment.
Okay. So this is kind of a question that needs to get answered fairly early. Everybody's interested in how our rates compare to others. This is a snapshot of today's rate. It's based on a residential rate. And we've included, most of these rates include a base rate and a consumption-based rate. So for each of these, we used what we see to be an average trend of 800 cubic feet of use and the base rate. So using those numbers, we see Oregon City right there in I don't know that it's the middle in terms of dollars, but it's kind of in the middle in terms of our list. And I would say, the longer this slide sits out there, the longer we're hearing of others that are in the process of seeing increases as well. Hillsborough and Salem, Lake Oswego, City of Tigard is going to be seeing a major increase. They're not on the list, but we expect them to be at the bottom of this list in a few months. So that's just gives you a snapshot of what rates are looking like in the region.
John, can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
I'm curious, given that South Fork jointly owns, or that Westland and Oregon City jointly own South Fork, why Westland's rate is a good $10 lower than ours, given I assume that they're paying the same wholesale rate for water that we are.
That's true. As far as I know, they're paying a similar wholesale rate. I think Westland has turned down a lot of rate increases over the years. They've been kicking that can down the road a long time. And one of the things we don't want to model, I guess, is what's going on at Westland. We've seen a lot of news in terms of how their water system is not performing very well, and we don't want to be in that same situation.
Sure.
So a couple things. We've covered some of this information before, but I'll make it quick. We've got an outstanding water source at the Clackamas River. It's been serving us well for the last 100 years. That water is treated at South Fork Water Board and then conveyed through our pipe system to our customers. We serve pretty significant customer base. I guess one of the things that I wanted, the 10,000 customer service connections, something that we kind of, I don't know if we forget about, but isn't necessarily listed in some of our facts, but each one of those customers includes a meter and a service line and the associated parts that go with it, and the city's responsible for those parts as well. So keep that in mind. There was some question about miles of water distribution pipe, Damon, that you brought up. We did confirm 135 miles of this 154 is in our streets. We have 135 miles of streets, and 19 miles of that's outside the city's jurisdictional roadways. So it may be in a roadway, it may be the counties, it may be the states, or it may not be in a roadway at all. So that's where that 154 miles kind of comes up. We've got a fair amount of storage, not a lot though. We've got enough. I think the master plan says we've got right now 5 million gallons surplus. That helps, in fire protection, but I wouldn't say we're over the top with regard to storage. We've got a reasonable amount of storage. The other number that's changed on this slide is we're listing 5 pump stations. One of those is the Boynton pump station, which is really an emergency pump station should we have a major fire in the south end area. We could use that pump station, and that's the only time we would ever use that pump station. So the next 5 slides we've included in an attempt to share with you what we believe our water program is moderate in its approach to the system management, and it's a division that kind of stands on its own. So this one addresses some of those questions that we heard both during and after the meeting about, is our house in order with regard to how we operate our current system. So we're trying to share some of the things that we think tell that story a little bit, because we do feel we're pretty accountable for our water expenditures. We go through a budgeting process. It's a long-standing budgeting process comprised of several members of the community, meets annually, and those citizens serve a 3-year term. Basically, that's one form of check. I mean, staff, and usually the management staff put that budget together every year. We typically stay within the expenditures of the previous year unless there's a large-scale project or purchase that's on the slate. But other than that, the item-by-item budget doesn't change a lot. And that's kind of, I think, the best form of ground truthing that we have. And like, important topics, sometimes there's a lot of interest in those, other times there's a little bit of interest in those. But sometimes that's an indication of the level of comfort that the community has in their jurisdiction. And I think that's been a testament to the past. So these are some of the services we provide through our operations, maintenance, and water quality programs. Meter reading, we contract that service out. You've probably seen him driving around on this little bike. That's not something we do in-house. We contract that service. Meter replacements, that's something we do in-house. Whenever a meter needs to be replaced or we find the age of it is such that it's time to replace, we do that. So that's an ongoing service.
What's the differential between the 10,000 customer connections and the 11,000 meters?
I'm going to say we've meter reading and meter replacements. It's a good question, Dan. I don't recall. We'll have to come back to that. Let me think about that one, and
okay.
maybe we can answer it before the end of the meeting. Lots of fire hydrants, lots of valves. We exercise those valves. We try to exercise those valves pretty regularly, maybe a third per year. The hydrant maintenance, we share some of that responsibility with Clackamas Fire District, so we think we're pretty efficient on that end as well. They don't charge us for that, yet they go out and do a lot of the fire hydrant flushing and testing as well. We do a leak detection. One of the things that our master plan pointed out is we've got some water loss in our system, that was unaccounted for water loss. So for years now, we've hired a contractor that comes out, looks at about a third of the system every year, and then we have several lines that we look at annually just because they're in a slide maybe or an area susceptible to leakage. So we do that regularly. That report comes out. We take care of those leaks pretty shortly after we find out about them. That's not just something Oregon City does. That's pretty typical in the industry as well. We do in-house water line replacements, emergency response and repairs. We also share that amongst the other utilities. So we don't have somebody sitting at the phone 24/7, but we have call-out systems, and we the people that man that or that are on call during that period are shared amongst the other divisions as well. So we think it's a way that we're staying a little more efficient. So pump stations, reservoir inspections, I mentioned a little bit about that. Many of our pumps, I want to say 4 of our pump stations have generators in them, so when power goes down, we've got generator backup, so that's a good provision, but it requires maintenance. So weekly we're out testing and running and servicing. Servicing our generators as well as our pumps and our reservoirs. These pressure reducing valves, they're somewhat complicated. We've got a lot of them in the city because we've got so much topography. Those valves, they're large vaults, so just the constructability of those is pretty significant. Some of them are in precarious areas. I'm thinking of the one on 3rd and Bluff that's just off the top here. It's embedded in bedrock basically, and there's a valve system in place or a pipe system in place where you can pipe around those when you maintain those, or you have to replace those. So they're a little more complicated than just your standard valve. Usually they're a larger diameter valve. We test those annually as well. We've got SCADA computer system, which is our way of communicating with those facilities via radio and phone lines. That's also the system that would help call us out in the case of emergency or a failure somewhere. So we've got lots of ways to monitor those, lots of inputs that we monitor through that SCADA system. And then our equipment and vehicles, it's amazing to me some of the costs that are involved with some of these vehicles. Last couple of years, the Water Fund participated in a purchase with the Sewer and Stormwater Fund to help pay for a new VAC-on, because we're doing a lot more of this Vactor excavation instead of getting there with a backhoe. We're just going, we're cutting out the pavement, and we're vactoring that stuff up like a vacuum in a large pressure water system. It's a very expensive piece of equipment. That was over $300,000, and I can tell you the maintenance on those is up. We use them daily, but they're expensive vehicles. We're doing more and more night work, so we've got to have safety provisions for night work. That's not inexpensive. Those aren't inexpensive pieces of equipment. This year we're hoping to buy a track hoe, because for years we've worked with backhoes, and more and more we see the productivity goes up. We've been renting track hoes, so we're going to acquire one of our own. But engineering management, we do some in-house, and we contract a fair amount as well. So we think that's a relatively lean program with regard to city staff. We've got cross-connection control program. Gail can give you lots of information on that if you're interested, but also I want to really say about this is the regulatory compliance on all of our utilities is pretty heavy, but water, it's very heavy. So if you get the annual drinking water report in the mail, you get a piece of that. But there's a lot of reporting, there's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of training, there's a lot of monthly or more meetings that come out, and the regulators just don't seem to feel a need to kind of back off on a lot of that stuff. So we tend to see more and more of it, and it's a cost. Our flushing program, I think we're around 20% a year maybe of our system that we flush, maybe a little better than that. But the idea there is to move some of that to water through the system, keep it fresh, make sure our hydrants, we combine that effort with our valve maintenance and hydrant maintenance program. So when we do those things, we're kind of killing a couple of birds with one stone by doing, and at the same time moving that water through the system. Lots of other things on this list. Customer relations is one. We try to exceed customer expectations, but sometimes that's difficult to do. But in order to try to get there, it's face-to-face or on-the-phone communications with anybody that's got a question about whether it be a leaky water service or a real problem with water quality. So we spend a lot of time on that particular item. We've also got now an asset management system, which is one of the things that I noticed is recommended in our master plan. So we're writing work orders in the field. We're using that mapping system that you see online. We have a pretty robust system that we can actually take with us in the trucks when we're doing locates or we're doing an emergency water repair. We have all that information right at our fingertips, and we've started documenting, how much time and effort goes into dealing with a particular problem. So I feel like it's a robust system, but not over the top. We could probably get more robust, I suppose, if we wanted to. So Oregon City, in order to simplify this and not, break it out too much, it really kind of boils down to labor, equipment, materials, which we've just kind of talked about. Treated drinking water, which is really kind of our treatment plant operating costs. The one thing I wanted to go back on is South Fork also has a couple of pump stations. We didn't include those in the information that was provided, and they also have some reservoir capacity, which we didn't include in the information that we provided. But that's all part of that South Fork rate that we pay them for. Really, it's the capital improvement program that seems to have the other two items feel very fixed. There may be some eeks and things that we can do to continue to seek out efficiencies. It's really the capital improvement program that turns out to be our flexible spending program. If we've got funding left over, we apply it towards capital improvements, and we have done that regularly. We're just seeing kind of a significant reduction in our ability to maintain a capital improvement program. So that's kind of that's why we're looking at rates, and that's why we're so concerned about the rollback. So let's see. Talked about a fair amount of about our capital program. I think, to me, as I was reviewing the master plan, we've got lists for current needs in the existing system, renewal and replacement needs. There's also some future projects in the master plan. I just want to reemphasize this rate increase is about our current needs and our recommended replacement. It's not so much about our future replacements. Those would be paid for through future development and system development charges. So anyway, we'll see more of that in some of the dollars that John, or some of the slides that John's going to present. But we're looking at trying to replace 2 miles of pipe each year. That turns our system over in about 75 years, and gets rid of some of that aging infrastructure. The last bullet on this item talks about our Public Works Operations Center. That's something that if you've paid attention to your city commission meetings regularly, that's another hot topic. We've been stocking away in the water fund about $400,000 a year into an account so that when we have a decision on a operations center, actually it's a public works center, it's going to be all of our public works staff would be in that particular facility, at least that's the plan. You know, a new building, improved site, better truck storage. If you've seen our facility, you kind of know some of our needs there, but that's something that's coming as well.
You mean not everybody can go through the 4-foot door you have in your office?
Yeah. They can usually get through it. They just, you know, struggle. That's it.
I have a question for John, if I can. I'm curious, the leakage that you were talking about, leak detection, water loss.
Mm-hmm.
What percentage or equal to gallons are we losing compared to other cities, or do you have that information?
I don't have the comparison. I would say our leakage has been reported as high. We're at 16.8%, I think is what the master plan listed, which is higher than we'd like to be. We'd like to be more in the range of 10 to 12%. But we've spent a lot of effort trying to find that leakage. But that's one of those areas where, you know, we need to keep seeking that out. We have some concern about the possibility of losing water at the mill site. That's one area that we could be losing a fair amount. But it's an issue. It's a tough one. We could be losing it in households that have small drips. I know they add up. It's hard to measure. These residential meters will measure a pretty low water rate, but not as low as, say, a small dripping faucet. They won't pick that leak up. So there is some question about how accurate residential meters are getting. They're getting better. That technology is improving, and so we keep wanting to move in the direction of improvement on that particular measure.
And how do you quantify that to a dollar rate?
I was wondering if we could, if we're about 10 minutes behind on the thing, if you could hold that question and John can answer it at the end. I just want to make sure that we have enough time for you guys to have a discussion here.
You betcha.
That's
I'll write it
right.
down.
Thank you, Rose.
Okay, so thank you. Our assignment is to perform a comprehensive water rate study for the city, and so our focus, and some of this will be a review. I'll do a little brief review and then move into some of our preliminary findings for you. What should rates do, and what should the results of a rate study be? Well, what we try to do is establish how much rate revenue is needed to make sure that the water utility is fiscally sound now and into the future. Rates, another goal of rates is to charge only for services provided, recover those costs, and to do it equitably. That's a rate structure issue to make sure that who should be paying for water are the ones who are paying for water, the different types of services provided. There are other objectives that we try to take into account when we, again, get into designing rates, conservation incentives, rewarding folks who conserve water, making sure that revenue is relatively predictable and stable from year to year so that the city can plan, and then also maintaining minimum fund balances and other fiscal policies that allow the utility to be fiscally healthy into the future. So this is what the rate study analysis looks like in graphic form. At this point in the process, what we're focusing on is that the top orange box that says assess rate revenue needs. That's the revenue requirement, and what we're all about there is determining how much revenue is needed from rates to meet all the financial obligations of the water utility. So that's the real key question for our initial discussions. Some of the expected needs that are incorporated into our preliminary analysis. We've got purchased water from South Fork. We understand those increases will be 3 to 5% annually into the future. There's the potential for larger increases if Clackamas River Water finds another source. They purchase water from Oregon City right now. If they find another source, those costs from South Fork could go up. The water purchases are about $1.4 million right now in the current fiscal year. By fiscal year 2016, those could increase to about 24% of the city's operating budget. We also have capital needs. John talked about the Water Master Plan. The recently adopted Master Plan identifies specific projects that are needed. Most of them are replacement projects in orientation, but that's a little less than $1 million a year of immediate needs. We also have, meaning specific projects. We also have one thing that the city has not been doing as proactively perhaps as it could is replacing pipe on an annual basis. And there's a recommendation in the master plan that the city undertake pipeline replacement at 2 miles a year, which is basically 75-year replacement cycle. That's $2.3 million a year in pipeline replacement. So that's in addition to the specific projects identified in the master plan.
So have we been currently, over the last 10 years, have we been doing that?
We've been doing some pipe replacements, but we haven't been allocating that kind of dollar amount to pipe replacements.
So what have we been allocating?
Closer to that 900,000.
Okay.
And the city's been somewhat constrained by the provisions of the charter and adopted only the 3% increases per year when needed. And I think that in part has resulted in some of the deferral of these pipeline replacements. John also talked about the Public Works Operations Center upcoming, and in our scenarios that we'll show you, we're assuming that construction doesn't start until 2018, so that's a few years off. Current limitations on the rate side are the provisions of the current charter, the rate rollback. We are forecasting that would take effect, as I mentioned, middle of October 2014. That is fiscal year 2015. So that impact would be part of the year in 2015 fiscal year and part of the year in fiscal year 2016 to take the full effect. The cumulative reduction would be about 27% of current water rate revenue. The other limitation is the inability to debt finance without a public vote. That can be looked at as a limitation, I guess.
For instance, if we wanted to take on a bunch of projects, right?
Try to get them done in finance them in 1 year and spread that cost over 20 years. Yes, the city would issue a revenue bond typically, and without the charter amendment, they could do that without a public vote. But
and you see that as a negative?
Well, purely from a purely financial standpoint, that's why I said you could look at it that way. But that's also, I know could also be viewed as a positive thing that would be subject to a public vote. So the rate rollback, as I mentioned, effective October. Well, the debt would be paid off October 15th, 2014. We're assuming that the rollback would be effective November 1st, 2014. Just to give you a little bit of detailed background on how we calculated that revenue reduction, we rolled back the rate to the 1994 level and then applied 3% increases from that time. We have actual customer statistics from the 2011 fiscal year. We applied them to the rolled back and escalated rates for 2011 and compared what that revenue would be to the actual fiscal year 2011, and the difference is the impact of the rollback, a little less than $1.4 million, or as I mentioned, about 27%. So we ran 3 different financial forecast scenarios for you. And I guess before we get into those results, I want to talk a little bit about what they mean, because what we're trying to show is, and we're trying to contrast for you, is the impacts of fully funding all the city's needs as we understand them to be from the operating budget and that budgeting process and the water master plan. So scenario 1 is if we were to fully fund all those needs, which is not in addition to the current level of operations. It's assuming the status quo in operations with the addition of capital as defined in the master plan. So we'll look at that. We'll also look at I'm still going to, sorry. The other scenarios we will look at, we'll look at phasing up to full funding, because this has an immediate rate impact. And then the third one will be, if there were to be the rate rollback, what would that impact be on operations? So scenario 1, as I mentioned, we're assuming that there would not be a rate rollback, so this would require a public vote to either implement an increase or revoke the charter amendment. But it assumes full funding of capital needs beginning in 2014. So as defined in the master plan, those specific projects, system reinvestment of $2.3 million a year, and the Public Works Operations Center construction beginning in 2018. So in this pattern of increases, there would be a large initial increase and then no more than 3% per year after that.
I need to be clear on something, if I might. So this additional $2.3 million a year is an addition to what we've normally been spending at $900,000. Is that correct? So, in other words, we're more than 250% increase in our capital expenditures for this pipeline replacement.
The amount that we've been spending on capital in the past has varied based on projects, project timing, those kind of things. But generally, it's run about $900,000. Okay, yeah, we're asking you for, in addition, we're asking you to actually fund a pipe replacement program.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So scenario 2, as I mentioned, achieves ultimately the same full funding of those capital needs, but we take the system reinvestment and start small and phase into it. So we're not at the $2.3 million until 2018. So we start at $500,000 and then step up each year to 2018. So this would require a smaller initial increase, followed by a series of increases that are more than 3%. Scenario 3, as I mentioned, is the full impact of the rollback, as you will see in the first year of the rollback, the revenues are not sufficient to meet the operating budget, so there's no room for capital construction given the current level of operations. Okay, so here's scenario 1, again, assuming no rollback with full funding. You can see the operating budget escalated by inflation is that green bottom bar. There's some current debt service, which we know will be paid off in fiscal year 2015. And then you can see the increase in capital spending there and the required increase from 2013 to 14. That's a little over a 50% increase, and then 3% increases per year. The difference you'll see, for example, in fiscal year 2018, revenues exceed projected expenses. There are two things the city could do in that case. We have planned capital projects that extend beyond 2018. So what the city would be doing is banking that slight addition to spend on capital in future years. But the other alternative would be to go with lesser than 3% increases after that initial increase in 2014. And that would, and operate right at that level. That would not allow the city to set aside money for capital after fiscal year 2018. Scenario 2 again, assumes no rollback. This is the phased funding, so you see a smoother pattern of projected rate increases. That initial increase in 2014 is 25% in this case, and then followed by a series of 8% increases. Scenario 3, as you can see in fiscal years 2015 and 16, the full impact of the rollback taking effect, revenues down under $5 million. That's less than the operating budget. And so the city would be unable to, again, at the current level of operations, spend any money on capital. So, and again, I'll caveat these. We're showing you sort of the two extremes as a way of bookending the discussion, hopefully. What the commission determines to do could be something in between or entirely different than what we're showing you. But we wanted to also give you an idea of what those bill impacts would look like associated with those scenarios. So scenario 1, if you remember, is full funding right off the bat in fiscal year 2014, and you can see the rates go from, and this is again for a typical single-family residence, from around $30 to the $49.91 you see there. After that, the increases are more modest after that initial increase. Scenario 2 is the phased scenario, and probably the best way to compare these is to look at the out years. They end up in a similar place. Scenario 3, with the rollback, rates are actually lower in 2018 than they are currently, and percentages are shown there as well. This is a graphical depiction of the same information, the average single-family residential bills over the planning period from fiscal year 2013, which is the current fiscal year, through fiscal year 2018.
So we'll open it up for questions for John or John Lewis.
I have a couple questions. John, you mentioned early in your presentation some of the services you provide, and I had a couple questions on the cost to the citizen of a water meter replacement, leak detection cost if it's done in a residential environment, and also emergency repair. How much of that cost actually gets sent to the user?
All of that is absorbed within the water rates. So if any of those, so leak detection, we pay that under our operating budget. Meter replacements, we pay that under our operating budgets. And leak repairs, we pay that under. So no bill goes out for that.
That's assuming that the leak is between the meter and the street.
That's true. That's
because
true.
from the meter to the house, that's
true.
the homeowner's responsibility.
Yes.
Right.
I know because I had to do it down on Monroe.
Yes. Thank you for that clarity. Yeah. So everything. Yeah.
That was our responsibility. Your responsibility as a provider.
One of the other things that I think gets a little bit missed, and we've got this 154 miles of pipe. Each service, if we've got a 60-foot right-of-way, you could assume each service is an average 30 feet. So we've got that liability as well. That's in addition to the 154 miles of pipe.
Right.
And every meter, that's a cost. Hopefully, one that we can afford under the the scenarios that we're looking at. But I just think it's important for people to realize that we get a lot of leaks and we do a lot of service line replacements,
right,
in addition to main line replacements.
Another question before we get into the discussion, I'm sure we will, about the repairs to the pipes. I understand there's X amount of pipe that has to be replaced over X amount of time. If you were to characterize our current situation, what percentage of our pipes are good, what percentage of our pipes are okay, and what percentage of our pipes are bad? Can you characterize that at all?
Well, I can't give you accurate numbers, but what I can tell you is most of the stuff on the hilltop, late 70s or newer, right? Most of the stuff. That's a big generalization. I get that, but it's most of the stuff. Stuff, on the lower levels, McLaughlin neighborhood, for instance, we see most everything in that pipe has reached the end of its service life. So, sure, we're taking this, approach where we take, 2.3 million a year, and we take off 2 miles at a time. I worry a little bit about our ability to really kind of take on. I guess we're counting on those pipes lasting longer than what we would, a design service life.
Well, that's my question. I mean, you're talking about 2 miles a year.
75 years to get.
It's pretty hard when you've got, let's say, 50% of our pipes are in are in a bad situation. That's when we start talking about our ability to bond to make a major repair. And I think that's what people have to understand, especially some of us who live in the older part of town. Excuse me. So I just think that's important people understand, and I think it's really not. When you look at 2 miles per year, it's okay, I get it. But when you have a big project, you have an earthquake, and you have a big project. I mean, there's an awful lot of things that have to be done out there, and it's very difficult. And bonds people, look at the fact that we can't get a bond without a vote. It's as a difficult thing to do. And I just think that's something that we have to all talk about. I think that's a big piece of this that we kind of blew over, but I think that's a very important part of this rollback situation. And then one other question, if I could: what are our legal requirements to provide clean water? Well, clean water, one thing, but what are our requirements as a city to provide pipes, provide the infrastructure to the citizens? So, for instance, if a pipe breaks in the middle of my street and the city doesn't have the money to pay for that, is there a state requirement, is there a federal requirement that would you require you to go in and do that as a city, or would I have to go and get a local improvement district to repair it ourselves if there was no money in the city to pay for it?
What I understand is we're obligated to provide water to the property line at a certain amount of pressure. I can't remember the pressure, 20 pounds of pressure. And that's the city's obligation to do, and that's a state mandate. Help me out here. So yeah,
John, did you have something to add? Did you have something to add to that?
No, on the regulations.
That's the best answer I could give you right now.
I think we could take that. We could find an answer to that question, because your question is, if the city had no money to actually respond to that line break, what is their legal responsibility?
Right.
Right. What's the?
I mean, are we going to be forced to pull money out of the general fund to support that? Are we going to be forced to? I mean, that's the question that we have to ask, and people need to understand. I mean, the citizens of the city need to understand that there's a value to this, and there's a cost to this. I mean, to provide the fresh water that we have, the good water that we have, there's a cost to running this. Right. I mean, it's great to have a rollback, and it's great to save a few bucks, but the fact of the matter is, if you're putting yourself in a bad position for a long period of time, this is a bad idea.
Well, I have to jump in here. The point of the rollback, the point of the whole system when it happened, was that water rates increased close to 100% overnight without a vote, without any kind of real discussion. And so the intent of the 3% a year was to boil the frog, was to say, okay, you should raise rates 3% every year, no matter what, so that you can build that reservoir of capital to use when you have an emergency or when you have something, unanticipated happens. So it's not so much about, do we trust the people to vote? It's, do the people trust that government isn't going to rip out the credit card one more time and take out a bunch more debt and then say, oh, we have to increase your rates by 50, 60, 80, 100%.
But to be fair, to get the other side of that story, we had no intake. We had no water, Dan. We were renting pumps to pump water into our intake. We had to have a new intake. Now, where do you get that money? We got it through bonds. That's how it happened.
I don't disagree with that, but part of the and I don't necessarily agree that the location of the old intake was bad, and that's a discussion we could have 20 years ago. But we also didn't need to build in the way over capacity in the pump station that we did.
One thing I'd like to do before we get into the interesting discussion here is make sure that everybody understood or has their question answered on John's slide with the scenarios. Are there any questions about that?
I have one.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. Okay. On scenario 2, you're assuming 8% annual increases.
Well, the specific pattern is,
shown on the bottom of this,
was 25%. Yeah, there it is. Thank you. 25% in fiscal year 2014.
Right.
8% in 15, 16, and 17, and then back down to 3% after that.
So, are you assuming that in this whatever charter amendment might show up that the voter approval of more than 3% would be removed?
I'm not making an assumption either way on that. There are two ways that this could happen. Either within the existing charter, as I understand it, it would require public votes in each of those years, or it would be if there were a revocation of the charter amendment.
Okay.
That's the only way it can happen.
And John, you mentioned Blue Heron. Are they still using any measurable amount of water down there?
Yes, metered. It's metered as far as we can tell. But yes, so they are using water, right? Even as even with the mill shut down, they're still getting a sizable water bill due to water loss through that site. Now that's measured, so we are measuring that. But
my question is, do they need water?
They need water supply for their fire suppression system.
Okay, so we can't just
turn the valve off.
Okay.
Craig?
If they're paying for it.
So how did you come up with the scenarios? Because it seems like you would again look at the costs versus just looking at the revenue required. And when you add the Public Works building, that doesn't seem like it's part of covering the costs of replacing pipe and providing the service.
What we took the master plan and the operating budget essentially as givens, and so you could look at this as a worst case, particularly the immediate full funding of all the capital in the master plan and the operations. John described the process for developing the operating budget every year, and so we didn't go in and do any further auditing or review of the budget itself. And what I mean, what I was trying to indicate, we're looking at the bookends here, so that it's a rather extreme case here, full funding, but it is in stark contrast to what happens to the water service in the case of the rollback. We're trying to show if the utility were to meet all of its needs as we know them, this is what it would look like. I think it's likely that what would end up being implemented or considered by the commission to go out to a vote would be something in between. But we didn't make that call. We just wanted to show you what the needs as they were presented in the master plan, the budget, what that impact would be.
John, could you, so the green on those bars, that's their operating.
That's current. That's the operating budget escalated by inflation every year, and then you got the debt service that is paid off in fiscal year 2015. This one again phases up to the full $2.3 million and capital projects as defined in the master plan. This is before the commission or you have said, hey, I think we need to do something less than that on the capital side or stretch it out farther. Right. That's the dark blue is the capital spending.
As a percentage, how much of the cost of the Public Works building is being built into this scenario?
The current contribution is $400,000 a year, and what I'm trying to
we just flatlined it. We just left it at $400,000 a year.
It's a little bit higher than that. The full funding is a little bit higher than that because it allows for construction to initiate in 2018. Right.
But my point is the Public Works building being totally financed out of the water system?
No,
All
it's
four
not.
utilities.
It's
Okay.
all four utilities share that. And I guess to Craig's, I want to, the public works facility is to me like a piece of fleet or a piece of equipment. It's a need, and it's a capital need that kind of falls into that's one of those things that we can make a choice on. I'm not advocating for stretching that any further, and that's why I think it's important for us to show it. But I also don't want to. I want to be transparent about that, because I think it's going to come up that, well, why are you stocking away this $400,000 for an operations center? Why do you need a new building? Well, come to our building and we'll show you. But it's like a truck to me. It's a facility need, or it's a need that is part of the water operations fund, and so we want to reflect it that way.
And I'm not questioning whether it's needed or not. It just seems like, as an advisory committee, we should be able to look at the costs. And I'll repeat myself, but there was about $450,000 in fees that the city gets that the water department doesn't. And then if you add the $400 for public works, all of a sudden it's $1 million a year that isn't going towards specifically the services. And I think you have to look at revenue and you have to look at the expenses. And I'm not questioning salaries or anything like that, or if you're efficient. It just seems like you need to break those out so you can see it. And personally, I believe the voters are smart enough and reasonable enough that if a program was presented for the needs of maybe public works and doing the repair or replacement of pipes over 50 years to get caught up, that they might approve it, just as they approve going to a new fire district.
Yeah.
I mean, the voters aren't
savvy.
dumb.
They're savvy. Yeah. No, I get that.
Getting back to your question, as far as the annual contribution to the Public Works Operations Center, about $675,000 a year of all that capital.
Okay.
We'll allow it to begin in 2018. Between 2014, fiscal year 2004, beginning in fiscal year 2014, ending in fiscal year 2018. That's when there'd be enough bank to construct it.
So
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
And that's roughly 25% of the total cost.
Right. The only caveat I want to make to that is the water and the sewer historically have been setting aside more than the street and the stormwater funds, and that's been an internal budgeting point. For one, we haven't done a master plan for the sewer. We haven't done a master plan for the storm, and our sewer, by the way, needs to be redone as well. So it's basically available funding. So we've been trying to set aside what we thought was manageable in terms of a savings for the operations center, and still have a capital program for all the utilities. So far, the intent is all those utilities share it equally, and they would pay equally. But so far, it's been water and sanitary that have put in, I think, around $400,000 a year. Street, is less than that.
So, John, I just want to clarify this slide, the rollback and no capital, this assumes a 3% rate increase.
Yeah, after
allowed by the rollback, but you don't have a blue here because there wouldn't be funds to do it.
Well, and we're making an assumption there that the capital is discretionary, and we've left the operating budget as is. But yeah, as you can see, revenues after the rollback go down in fiscal years 15 and 16 as the full impact takes effect, and then in fiscal years 17 and 18, we're assuming 3% increases in those years.
So while we've got this slide up, John, my understanding earlier in the conversation, we said that because of the debt service, the court allowed us to maintain that percentage until the debt service was paid. But this slide shows that we're dropping revenue before the debt service is paid.
It's a timing issue. That fiscal year 2015, the rollback would occur November 1st, 2014. So you get July, August, September, and October at the current rate levels. Then the rates are adjusted for November and beyond. So the total revenue impact is a reduction in fiscal year 2015. And then the beginning of the next fiscal year is when you get the full impact. That's fiscal year 2016. So it's just a timing.
Right. It looks like from this slide that we can't pay our debt service in 2015.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, but it would be more like for the first 4 months it would be above the debt service, and then it would dip down below it as it disappears.
So overall, to answer the question, I guess is the overall, yes, we could pay the debt service in 2015.
Yes.
And then have no capital for the rest for the next foreseeable future.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Damon.
I just want to clarify something for John 1. The $400,000 is the total amount that Public Works is setting aside, or is that just what water is setting aside?
Just what water is setting aside.
Okay, because when you were talking, you went back and forth there a little bit with the comment. So
there's 4 funds.
Right, but that's
water and
that's
sewer
waters.
are about. I mean, I'd have to pull the numbers for about 400,000.
Okay, I just
So
wanted
to clarify then, if you're not setting aside $400,000 in streets and in storm, where is that money going to come from at the end of the day?
Well, in our mind, all of those funds have to pay equally. They just haven't been stocking it away equally. So how we get there on those other funds is yet to be determined. We don't have the money to do it.
Equal being defined as square footage, so if your water operation is a lot bigger than transportation, their share, their equal share.
Their proportional share.
Proportional share. At the end of the day, in theory, we'd like to be saying 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. I can't guarantee right now that we're getting there, but that's what we think in theory makes sense.
So what I would like to do now, there's just a couple of summary slides that John's going to go over, and then what I would like to do, and make sure that we do this and with enough time for Craig to participate, is just ask for your best advice, and I'm just going to call on you guys one at a time for the City Commission. You know, what would be your best advice for them on this topic? So, John, I think there's just a couple of slides to finish up.
Okay. Well, this does, obviously boil down to money, and so many of our costs are fixed that it feels very much like capital is the one that falls off the plate when you don't have enough money. But, I know the presentation team was having a hard time kind of figuring out how to use your time wisely. We don't have a lot of meetings scheduled with you folks, so there's a lot to talk about, rates and operations center and all the what kind of rates we should have, and how many miles of pipe. There's lots to talk about, but yeah, we've got this limited window of opportunity, and what we really want to kind of narrow this discussion towards is how should the city and what kind of recommendation does this group make to the City Commission on how it should move forward with the charter amendment. And so that's, we can talk a lot about all the details, and I know many of you are very detail oriented, so that, the devil's in the details. It's the challenging piece is we don't have many hours together to kind of think through this, and if some of them we can deal with kind of fact sheets that we can get back to you folks on. But really, it's kind of like a recognition that, funding shortfall exists out here under this current charter. Do we do amendment? Do we, just take it to the vote and raise the rates and live with the current language in the charter? Hopefully, we're beyond the do we just let it, we don't have the do nothing option, and we hope we've convinced you of that. We think the City Commission is convinced of that. So I think if this group came to them with a do nothing option, they would probably wonder, if you guys were listening. So anyway, but this really boils down to, we just don't have enough money, and it's capital that tends to fall off the plate.
I'd like to hear what Craig has to say before he has to leave.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'd have 3 things. I think you need to evaluate the costs and relook at your budget. Then I think you need to set a reasonable replacement, and maybe you provide a good, better, and best which you would do, and then I think you need to go to the city for a bond.
So you're saying leave the charter as it is and just take it out as a revenue bond?
I'm not educated enough to address the charter. I think we should have a revenue bond for the capital improvements, and I believe there's enough citizens that value and appreciate the water department, and the need, and that's what should be presented. I don't know what that amount should be.
Okay.
The other thing I guess I would say is we still need to look to make sure people are paying their fair share.
Sure.
Right. Oh.
I just want to clarify where Craig is at for my personal thing, and that is, assuming we went for a revenue bond, the bond passed, you wouldn't have any issue about leaving the 3% annual increase limit in place in the charter?
That's a tough question, Dan, because I don't know if 3% is reasonable or if it should be 4%. But I have no problem leaving some cap.
Some limit.
Right.
Okay.
Because I think the people that voted for that or against, whatever you want to look at, the 50 or 60 or 100% increase, the city should be increasing the water rates every year.
Right. Okay.
All right, Damon.
Geez, man.
Well, do you want to go, Kim?
Ladies first.
Ladies
Sure.
first. All right.
I think it seems like one of the things when talking to the city council that might be helpful, which kind of got to conversations down at that end, was to better, and some of this graphically, like scenario 3, kind of being able to describe in some ways, what happens if we don't, if this is the scenario, and something big does happen, what happens? Does it come from general fund? What are the, if we don't make this investment, what will the city look like? And I think that will help paint a picture of why this is so important. So I don't know if you do that through pictures or through graphs, but obviously it's pretty clear that do nothing is not an option, but I think people would be interested in knowing, so what Yeah,
it's interesting because
what would happen?
There's an example, right? Your West Lynn, who also has I'm not sure if it's a charter amendment, but they have to go to a vote of the people to raise water rates, and they have failed to do that numerous times, and now it's the story of the week over their line breaks because they can't actually get their community to vote yes.
Right. So being able to say we couldn't support fire flows, or that if something big happened, general fund would get wiped out, or we have to have an emergency fund. I think expressing that might help show what that do nothing consequence. And then, as obviously something needs to happen. I don't know, capping rates. It's much more palatable to increase rates slowly over time than have a large increase, obviously. But there's some significant investments that need to be made. So I would hope that the community would have enough sense of understanding that you don't want to have to go back to them every single year to ask for increases, and that maybe they agree to a larger increase and then more subtle increases over time. But if you could agree to a longer term plan, if you're going to have to go to a vote, you certainly wouldn't want to do that on a regular basis, because that takes a lot of staff and time in meetings like this to go through that process also.
And the cost of the elections themselves.
Exactly.
Damon?
That's my turn.
Yeah, it's your turn.
Well, I agree to a large extent with what you said. I think one of the things that would be beneficial also in the do-nothing option would be to show staff loss, response time loss, overtime costs, because now you've got fewer people doing things in emergencies. Those are all kind of like especially with overtime, those are like invisible costs that people don't realize until the end of the year when suddenly your budget's all red because of something happening. So, what that means, to there are 4 less people, 1 less emergency response crew, whatever that might be. I don't know what that is. And then I guess the other thing is I think, frankly, the city's done a really darn good job with their rates, and they could have raised them every year, although the charter amendment doesn't tell them to do that. It does give them the opportunity to do that, and they didn't. They did it when it was fiscally necessary. So, I guess my advice to the city commissioners would be to go out with a charter amendment that repeals the rollback, not necessarily the cap, but at least the rollback. And then possibly, maybe at the same time, sometimes it can be confusing to some people, but go out with either a bond measure or a statement of, in order to get on top of things, we would like for the next 4 years to have an 8% rate, or whatever that that median plan was, or whatever the median plan is, so that it's like, okay, we've done good, we didn't raise everything we could have, now we need a small catch up of 3 or 4 years. Let us go to 8%. This is what it means fiscally.
One of the, the rollback and this question about, leaving in the charter a specific percentage of rate increase. Couple things. I know that's not the norm for most communities. Now, maybe there's more going that way, I don't know, but it's not been the norm for most communities to have a specific limit on rate increases. The other thing is the bonding issue. If we don't have the ability to buy, bonds or sell bonds, then, that's another thing that kind of this charter amendment limits. It really hurts us. Adam and I were talking, and I think you were too, Tim, in terms of, in an emergency, it really does, and there's the potential for emergencies, whether it be the intake structure falls off its foundation or something else. I don't know. There's that out there. So it's nice to have that ability to do that without taking these things to the vote, especially when that's not the norm. I guess I'd like to hear a little bit about what has happened.
Well, statewide, a general obligation bond has to go to a vote of the people, no matter what.
I was just going to say, could we just go? I would love. Could we just go? You're next up.
Okay.
If you're done, or you have one more thing. I just want to make sure we get everybody's advice before we.
Well, my personal opinion is the whole thing should just be repealed. But you hold your people accountable by electing them and or recalling them, and so that's the way to do it. But barring that, at the very least, the rollback I think needs to be. At the very least, that needs to be repealed, and beyond that, because we've been fiscally prudent. So, whether it's because we're afraid of the rollback or whether it's because we're just doing our job.
Right. Dan.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you for being
let me answer the accountability question, because I think the whole point of the charter amendment was an accountability issue, in that it got passed on a cold December Wednesday evening when nobody was paying attention, and then there was no accountability because you can't unelect those people in time to take your credit card back. So, that's why it's there. I mean, we see it nationally. We're running up these huge debts, but we have no way to pay for them. So at the municipal level, we are still required to have a balanced budget. So, I believe that if you have an emergency, if you have something that absolutely happens, I think if we could talk about natural disasters, there are plenty of other sources, the feds and FEMA and state and all of those kinds of things that will come to the rescue, at least in the short-term interim, until we can get our, financial house in order. If we're talking about something that's really in need for our community in the water system or in the street system, I believe, like Craig does, that you can go to the people and say, hey, this is, this benefits all of us. This is a real need. This is not, pie in the sky. We're going to build a fancy new city hall or, marbled streets or anything like that. We got to have water. They'll pay for it. At the end of the day, I believe that's true. I have to ask a question though. In the last 20 years, and this was the whole point of the charter amendment, was to encourage the city commission to be responsible and say, yeah, 3% a year is reasonable. It's not going to, nobody's going to jump up and down at that. How many times in the last 20 years have we increased the rates?
John knows that a little better than I do.
Yeah.
It's
I don't have it with me.
We've increased the rate 6 times. Sorry. Just because I am. Again, so we've increased the rate 6 times by the 3%. There was the implied initial rate increase of 62.5%, which resulted in some of the discussions that we've had. So that rate increase carried a few years without 3% rate increases. We're assuming if there is a rollback that we would apply 3% every year because the initial rate bump implies that those rates were in place, if that helps. But overall, over those years, it was 6 times we did not increase the rate by 3%.
We did not, or did?
Did not.
I apologize. Did not.
6 times did not. That's
Okay.
right. Dan, do you have more?
Well,
your advice, your best advice.
Well, my best
to the
advice is,
policymakers.
and I still haven't heard the answer to this question, has anybody gone to Judge Jones and said, ask the question, do we really have to roll the rates back? Because I heard a lot of lawyers and a lot of people give opinions, but at the end of the day, Judge Jones is the only one who can tell us that. And until we get an advisory opinion, I think we're wasting a lot of time working over scenarios that we don't need to work over if we haven't gone to him and said, does this really mean that we have to roll the rates back to, because that was never I'll tell you right now, and I've said it in public meeting after public meeting, it was never the intent of our measure to wait until 2014 and then roll the rates back. And the way I read the initial opinion was they threw out the rate rollback because it was in violation of the contracts clause of the Oregon Constitution. So if that was the case, where did the rollback come from now?
So
I would write a friend of the court brief tomorrow and say this was never our intent. The rates should be able to sit right where they are today, and then we can move forward
with 3%.
Or if you need more, if you need the and I'd support the $2.3 million, and I believe in maintenance just like Craig does. We all have businesses and work and things, and we take care of our trucks and we put new roofs on our buildings and we do all that stuff. We have to do that. I believe that we could go to the people and say these are the real capital needs, and if you wanted to increase the rate, one time. For 3 years by 10% a year or whatever to accomplish that goal of getting to that 2.3 million, I think you could get there.
So you're saying that the rollback has already been decided at Judge that it wasn't right, so that would stand today. The rollback.
I'm saying I don't know the answer because nobody's asked him.
Do you have anything else?
Not right now.
Not right now. Okay, Tim.
Well, I think that obviously we can't do it. It can't be a do nothing scenario. We have to do something, and to me it makes sense. I don't think we need to take a rollback. I think it does make, and I agree with Dan. I think the discussion has to be had at the legal level first of all, and decide if we even have to deal with it. I do think we need to be in a position to be able to get bonds. We have a city commission. We elect a city commission to make those decisions. I don't think that every voter has to make that decision. That's just my personal opinion. I also understand Dan's feeling about it, but the reason we have water today, the reason that we have the ability to wheel water to other resources, the reason that we're in a good position is because we made that decision many years ago to put in this new intake, and it costs money to do it. I mean, that's reality, and we took advantage of the bond, and we did it, and there it is. But now we are in a good position from a water position, and that's important nowadays. It's more important today, in my mind, than it ever has been. And Oregon City, West Linn, with South Fork, we're in a very enviable position in this community. We're able to get the water we need out of a good, clean drinking source. We're not having to worry about whether we're going to pull water out of the Willamette and clean it. I mean, so we're in a real good position, in my opinion. So, that costs money, but I think the decision was made, whether it was a popular opinion at the time or not. The decision was made, and I think it was a good decision, and I think we're able to have the water we need today because of it. So, personally, I think we need to. I also have no problem with controlling a percentage, 3 or 4 or 5%, whatever that is, you know, for maintenance. But we have to look at the true cost, as Craig says, and what is it going to cost us? And are we going to be in a position to be able to bond something if we need to? If we need to go out and do the entire McLaughlin district or the entire Hilltop, whatever it takes, we need to be in that position to be able to go get that money. I mean, that's just tying our hands. That's tying staff's hands. That's tying us. And that's why we have a city commission to make those decisions.
I'm confused. How are your hands tied?
If you can't get a bond?
Well, no, but if you wanted to go do the entire McLaughlin district, you build a plan, John Lewis builds a plan, you say how much it's going to cost, and you take it to the people and you say, here, we need to do this, this is what it's going to cost, and you vote on it.
Right, and you're voting with the entire city, and you're talking about one little area. Dan, you know as well as I do that the people in Hilltop don't care that whether McLaughlin gets
Hey,
blue pipes.
Dan and Tim, wait 1 second, because I think we got your advice and we got your advice,
All right.
and we have 5 minutes and we have
Well,
the
that's
public
Rose's
back here.
advice.
So, Rose.
Sorry, Rose.
That's right.
That's okay, guys. I can make mine pretty short and sweet. I agree with Tim, and I agree with Dane, and most of the panelists here I can agree with. Doing nothing isn't an option, so we need to take some action. I think, I believe in representative government and democracy, so I believe we elect our officials to do the work that we need to have done and make the decisions we need to do. I think when we do charter amendments, they're full of unintended consequences. I think this is what we have before us right now. We're faced with bonding issues, and more issues than we really want to face. I think as far as options, nobody's talked about scenarios that have been presented. I'm concerned with the citizens of Oregon City being able to afford rate increases. The city is having difficulty with economic development. We do not have jobs here. Many people are out of work. How do they afford a rate increase? That, speaks to me right now. And in looking at the scenarios, it does concern me to go with scenario 1. Scenario 3 is not an option. I'm leaning towards scenario 2, which is more of a moderate scenario, but I am concerned that we're not going to be able to do what we need to do with scenario 2. So I'm still conflicted on these scenarios. I'm not sure, and I'm wondering, John, is there any grant money out here that can offset some of this? I'm also wondering
Craig,
if
thank you very much.
there is,
Thanks, Craig.
in doing some of these repairs, if there is some, by doing the repairs, such as the leakage, do we get any money back? What will we save by doing these repairs? And can that be reflected? And that's all I have.
All right, thank you. We have 5 minutes left, so unless, Dan, do you have anything, or Damon, any last thing? Or can I go to...
I want to hear what Frank has to say.
That's where I'm headed back to Frank, and I just want to say we just have a few minutes for that, but if you want to, do you want to stand up?
Well, I want the time to give a comprehensive presentation and not a part presentation. Can you extend it past 5 minutes?
How long do you need?
No more than 10.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
All right.
Wait, come on.
Is that okay with everybody, 10 minutes? And come up here.
Get the official microphones.
Nice to see everybody again, 20 years later. I think there's no one in this room or in this city questions the need for a viable and robust water system, and our intent here is to have that. However, I'm going to touch briefly on the history, and then I want to touch about why this confounds the general public and what I think we should do to move this forward and get the support of the people. The water rate hike many years ago was instituted to guarantee us an ongoing supply of quality water. It involved facilities construction, and it was to position us for the future. And that is how I understood it, and that's consistent with what you said. Unfortunately, there was a lack of communication and that reaction of the public, and a number of things came to be. The measure consisted of 3 things: the attempted rollback of the increase, which was found unlawful under the contracts clause, understandable. The rollback itself, which seems to be the subject of this conversation, and voter approval on future bonds. So there's 3 issues that I'll probably deal with down the line. quite honestly, it's interesting that this is a water conversation, because when I hear it and I watch it, terms like murky, pools, clarity, and flow come to my mind. It gets murky. Where is the money and what does the budget consist of? What is the flow of money? What are the pools of money? So let me see if we can clarify this for the general public and for ourselves. I see two separate issues here. The initial vote was to service the debt, the bond issue. I did not see that, nor do I see that as an operational issue. And I trust, and I don't know if there's anybody financially can answer this, that all monies gathered under that vote were used to service the debt. If they were not, then that's totally not in keeping with what everybody understood at the time. I shouldn't say what I understood at the time. Separate issue is the system refurbishment piece we're talking about, which I think there's many questions about that. The third issue is day-to-day operational expenses. I don't want to muddle those together, nor do I want to muddle in the facilities issue that we talk about. So I think when we start talking about monies, we need clear pools of money that people can understand what it is we're trying to do. So there's some very good questions. How much have we instituted? I thought you could get 3% every year, and I think you should have gotten 3% every year. And I think that 3% should have gone to operational issues. And in addition, if we've hopefully had the foresight to foresee a replenishment or refurbishment of whatever number of miles of pipe at $2.3 million per year, adjusted for whatever year we're in, I would have hoped that we would have set up an escrow account dedicated to that. Because the public has no problem with a clear perception of what our money's to be used for. There's nobody here that doesn't want to be without quality water. So I think if we haven't done that, then maybe we should beat our breasts and say we've been remiss, and we need to do that. We need to start from somewhere. Hopefully, as again, those monies that were raised for debt service apparently were not used for refurbishment. I don't know if, can we, in all fairness to you, John, as interim, was there ever a comprehensive plan in place where monies were being gathered and put in an escrow account for purposes of this refurbishment we're now talking about?
The pipe replacement is what you're saying.
Pipe replacement, yes.
No.
Is there now, or has there ever been a plan for that?
Well, I guess, we've been doing an outstanding job with meeting the last recommendations of the Water Master Plan. So
no criticism intended, just the question is...
No, I'm not taking any. I'm just saying what we've been spending money on that has not been spent on operations has gone towards capital. So is that...
The question is there a dedicated fund that says X amount of the revenue we gain is going into... We anticipate $2.3 million in expenses, just like you have a fund set up to buy a building.
Well, you have a CIP, right? Is that the question? You have a list of projects that you're... Oh, wait, we have an answer from the finance.
I want to make sure we're within the constraints of time and that your presentation is... But one of the... with respect to what you need to present, but one of the questions, there might be some confusion. When John was showing scenario 3, I don't know if we can look at that slide. I think there's some confusion on a point of what we had done with the 3% increases, and want to just kind of clarify that. Might help to answer the question. So scenario 3 in 2013 is assuming the charter amendment in place with annual 3% increases and a rollback to 1994. So under that scenario, although we were at the time we had the bond indentures in place and the covenants wouldn't allow us to roll back to 1994, if we applied the charter amendment as it's written to 94 plus every year annual 3% increases, this is the rate structure that's in place. So it doesn't actually allow for set aside under that.
That wasn't the point. The point was they didn't make the rate increases when they could have. That was the point.
I just want to say that's...
Yeah, but you can't... This is all imaginary. That's like going back and changing history.
Right.
You can't do that.
No, that's the actual scenario there. That's what I want to just clarify for you. That scenario there, because the question was, have you taken the additional monies and set it aside?
Yes, that's the question.
Yeah, thank you. So just to answer, if we had applied the charter amendment specifically as worded, that slide there is exactly with annual, John can kind of answer this, but that includes an annual.
No.
every year
No, his question is,
No, that's
we
not my
didn't do it
question.
6 times. That's 18% that could have been set aside in a line item pipe replacement fund. Did we do anything with that when we did 3%, but we only needed 2? Did we take that 1%
Well, you know-
and put under pipe
What
replacement?
I would like to do right now is just to make sure you have time to finish up your talk. And what we've been doing is taking these questions down, and then we'll come back
Take
with
these
the
down.
answer. Thank
Quite
you.
honestly,
Yeah.
Damon, 3% compounded is more like 30%. If we
That's
had
okay.
done 3% for 20 years, it was an 81% increase. If we do 3% for 14 years, we're down around 51%.
Right.
So we've foregone 30%.
I'm just saying there were 6 times we didn't do it. That's 18%.
Agreed. So, Mike, that question is, I have no question. Those monies, if they were dedicated to the servicing that debt, fine. I'm going to come back to that in
That's
a
okay,
moment.
because we have 2 minutes.
Well, and maybe you'll see me again.
Good.
That's good.
The question
yeah.
is this. I struggle when you put up a slide, that second to last slide that says, with the impending rollback, there's not enough money for basic water system service. How can you say that when that money was dedicated to debt service? So I see multiple issues. I would like to go toward in front of the public. I do not want to roll back the 3% cap. That was a question of accountability and trust, as you stated. And I don't see any reason not to be able to operate within that. And it does not apply just to water. It applies across the board. And quite honestly, you can't close the barn door after the horse is out. Just like Milwaukee fights with light rail. Once those things are done, they're done. You cannot apply a measure retroactively. So I would actually get very involved to keep that in place. I'm going to forego some of this and probably have to come back. Remember this, we built that, we overbuilt that. Hopefully we're generating revenues from the water we're selling. And quite honestly, you can ask the general public, just tell the people where you're spending their money, identify it, don't pull it, and be very specific what you need the funds for. Because if you truly if we need to rebuild this system and we haven't provided for that, we've just been taking it out of general operating revenues, shame on us, but that doesn't say we have to repeat the mistake. Let's start right now. We need, on average, of $2.3 million a year. Here's how we need to raise it, either by revenue bond or by rates, or a combination thereof. Just be clear and concise in what you ask of your voting public, and I think you'll get intelligent support. What you do not want is to revisit the mistakes of the past. Communication ahead of time is key to getting support. And if you just blindside people, you're going to get that same reaction you got 20 years ago. I'll keep this short. I'll leave
Thank
it
you.
at that.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
I would like to say one more thing before we get out of here. Obviously, I think we all agree that we have to do something, but one, I do think we've got to ask Judge Jones for at least an advisory opinion to say, does it really mean that we have to roll the rates back to 1994 levels? I don't believe it does. But the other thing is that when we talk about raising all this money in this economy, we have to remember that there are numerous households in Oregon City where a $20 a month increase in water rates is a major factor in their budgets. Folks on fixed incomes, folks on unemployment, there's a lot of folks out there. So we have to, I think long-term planning is one thing, but I think in this first couple of years, we have to keep that increase down to as low as we possibly can and still do the maintenance and have the operational funding, and that's all I have.
All right. Next steps, September 11th, the City Commission work session at City Hall, 5:30 to 8 p.m. September and October, we wanted to have a discussion with you guys about scheduling a third meeting, but we'll do that by email if that sounds all right, Alita. October 9th, another City Commission work session. November 7th, a public hearing, and November-December timeframe, the City Commission considers charter amendment. So that's next steps. I appreciate you all staying.
Is there any
the extra
chance that
time.
we could have this meeting in like the afternoon/evening, so we might be able to have more than an hour and a half and not have to be away from work?
You're talking the meeting number 3?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. I know, Alita's done all the background on scheduling these, and she polled other people about availability. So I don't know how that plays out, but I hear that definitely.
So more like a work session, more time to
I
go
guess
into the details?
The other thing this slide didn't have on it in terms of schedule, which the last presentation did, so for Dan and Tim and Rose, and for Frank as well, our goal is to try to get this before the people in May. And this schedule's kind of, keeping that time frame in mind. What we've heard from Libby is, we don't want to try this twice. So, we're targeting May, and we think that's doable. It really kind of has been a press to get these meetings to fit together and not have them, and still provide good content. But so anyway, that's beyond December, I guess. So just keep that in mind as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Did Frank, do you have something else?
Well, as you said, Dan, if we're looking for
it's on TV, so we need to.
as you said, Dan, if we're looking for public input, I don't understand why the meetings aren't scheduled after the normal work day. I mean, as it is, I took off work to do this. I know some of you are missing work. I mean, if we're truly looking for public input, at least give a session 6:30 or 7 o'clock at night where the public can show up. And
well, the commission work sessions are
at night, right? So this group here
are they though? I mean, because Betty has to come here at like 3:30 in the afternoon. Are these work sessions going to be scheduled at normal?
This one here is 5:30 to 8.
Okay. 5:30 to 8, and we'll look, Alita. We'll work on checking the time for next. So after, does that work for everybody who's here today to have it be after work hours? Okay. So
great.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We're adjourned.